The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
And welcome to BronxTalk. One of the central issues in virtually all the campaigns this year is housing. Tonight we have two Bronx housing experts to analyze many aspects of the issue: affordable housing, conditions in existing housing, public housing, illegal conversions, tenant-landlord relationships, and much more. If you'd like to join our dialogue tonight, if you want to make comments or ask questions, maybe about your particular situation, then please call in at 718-960-7241. Or you can email questions or comments to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. For right now, please join me in welcoming the Deputy Director of the University Neighborhood Housing Program. It's Greg Lobo. Good evening. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks, Gary.
Nice to have you. And also from the West Bronx Housing and Neighborhood Resource Center. She's the Executive Director over there. It's Sally Dunford. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Well, let's start with this. I call it a catchphrase because it implies many things in this idea of affordable housing. We'll start with you, Greg, and we'll put up on the screen that your organization did a study recently, which was Nowhere to Go, is what it was called. And a large part of the study was dedicated to talking about affordable housing. Why is there this disconnect between the wages that people make and what it costs to live in the borough of the Bronx in reasonably simple means?
Yeah, I mean, this is really a huge national issue. It's just the Bronx is the place where it is the most acute, where we have this really big, disparate kind of direction that things are going between wages and the cost of living, rent specifically. So every year, incomes are at best staying flat, but when you adjust for inflation, they've been going down. So if you go back to the 1990 census, 2000, 2010, even since then, steady decline. And we didn't start that high to begin with here in the Bronx. Rents, meanwhile, are going up much faster than inflation, about maybe 50% faster than inflation since the late 80s. So, now it's typical where, if you're piecing together a couple of part-time jobs, the median income in a lot of the Bronx, especially in the neighborhoods we work in the West Bronx, is about $25,000 a year. And typically, if you're looking for a one-bedroom apartment, what's on the market is minimum $1,000. So right there, you do the math, simple math, $1,000 a month, 12 months, $12,000. That's half your income, basically. And that's why we're seeing that number keep going up every year, more and more families paying at least half their income on rent.
Before we talk about the other side from the tenant side, let's talk about the fact that rents are going up. Why are they going up? We have done a number of different aspects of this, and one of the most recent dialogues we had on the show was somebody saying, you know what, landlords, their expenses are going up, and even if you think they're not milking the tenants, but guess what, they've got to pass along their costs, otherwise it doesn't pay for them to have their housing. How do you evaluate that equation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's both, right? So you've got on one end, the cost of running housing does go up every year. We've seen really big increases in taxes, water and sewer, insurance. I mean, different types of things that it takes to run housing definitely been going up. And we've been doing a lot of work on that side to say, well, how can we control some of these costs? I know, we're all familiar with the filtration plant, but all that stuff goes into water rates that gets paid into that. So your rent's going up partly because of the filtration plant and how much it costs. I mean, you can look at it that way. But on top of that, you've got a lot of landlords who are, using the system how they can to take rent increases as much as they can above and beyond that.
And in fact, you know, property taxes are going up. It was Assemblyman Jonai who was here, and he's very familiar with the real estate industry. And he said, you know what, my property taxes as a landowner or a property owner go up, I'm going to pass that along. Sally, let's talk to you because you deal in more cases with individuals. So what's the play out of this? So here's somebody who says, you know what, I'm living in this house, my rent has gone up again. What do? I don't even know how I can bring up a family and you know, keep myself afloat. It's
really an acute issue, and we've seen the number of people who are seeking help to stop from being evicted. They doubled over the last year, and they had doubled over the previous year before that. So we've jumped from about seeing 200 people a year. Last year, and our year ends June 30th, we saw 700 families.
As opposed to 200
2 years earlier, yeah.
Wow.
And we can stop some of these evictions, but we can stop maybe 10%.
You know, you say you stop an eviction. Now, here's somebody who doesn't have the money to pay their rent. Speaking from the property owner's perspective, well, you know, I got to evict you because you got to pay your rent. How do you stop an eviction?
Well, it depends on the situation. And if someone really can't afford their apartment, we can't stop it. We can't. That's the bottom line. We look for three things. We look for somebody who is already in housing court. We look for somebody who has fallen behind on their rent for a good reason. You know, it can't just be I decided to pay off my credit cards, or you know, which is something we see fairly frequently. But usually it's because somebody got sick and couldn't work, and now they're back working. Because the third piece is they have to be able to pay the rent in the future. And they can do that three different ways. You know, they can have a job, that's the best. Sometimes they get a roommate, which is perfectly legal in New York. Or other times they may get what's called a third party, where someone from their family helps them to stay on, you know, till they get back on their feet.
The dialogue that we had briefly just before the show, and you were talking about, gee, I don't know if I want to put up my information because the phones will light up because so many people really have problems.
Right.
But if we do have, is there a phone number that people can call?
People can call us
Jane
at
put that info up.
718-798-0929, and take in consideration, we do only have 3 lines, so you might have to be a little persistent. So if you get a busy signal, it just means lines are busy. The other issue is we will be closed 2 days this week for the Jewish holidays. So, but we'll be there starting back on Monday.
I was also curious because the stereotype, I suppose, would be, well, this is just a tenant advocacy group, or they're only going to help tenants. But you made it clear to me also that you work with property owners as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Talk to me about what their issues are.
Well, the first thing we do when someone comes in is to figure out what the real problem is. Sometimes it's what people say it is, and often it's something totally different. So if a tenant comes in, they have
somebody here, and then it's really the property owners that's the problem.
Or it could be, this tenant, or they might be the problem. So the first thing to do is to figure out what the issue is, and I've seen, you know, in 20 years of doing this, I've probably seen just about everything. I think one of my first wake-up calls is somebody who had been a tenant advocate previously was the tenant who said, well, there's holes in my walls and the landlord wouldn't fix it. So I called the landlord and he says, you're damn right there's holes in the walls. The cops put the holes in the walls when they were looking for the guns. And I'm not going to fix it until they move. And I don't care who sues me. I was like, oh, maybe I don't want to do it this way. So, you know, it is stories.
Yeah, I was smiling because, boy, wouldn't we love to hear the conversations, be the fly on the wall of a housing advocate in the borough of the Bronx. You probably have heard everything. One thing on that side that I want to talk to you about, which you mentioned to me prior to the show, is this idea of illegal conversions. And we've seen very serious situations in the Bronx where people have either, you know, split rooms in half or jammed more people than really ought to be in an apartment. How serious is this a problem in the Bronx? And is there a way to solve it? Because we have great sympathy for people with, let's say, large families, or people who maybe they had to get out of another apartment, so they kind of move in together with their family. Characterize it for me.
Well, there is no way to actually characterize it because there's a whole lot of different pieces to it. But I think that the most common is people renting rooms to other people, and that can be legal as long as they're not overcharging them. I've seen some horrendous things. I think that the worst was about 1.5 years ago, where I found an elderly couple living in a closet in a basement of a building where the building had gone into foreclosure, and this man told them he was the super. He turned out he wasn't. He just happened to be there. And he rented them a closet for $300 a month. And they were happy to get it.
Is there enough enforcement?
No.
Which is a question I'm
No.
going to ask Greg in a
No.
moment about.
There's not nearly enough enforcement. And because the housing laws are very complex, and then when you add on to it the different language problems, you can see all sorts of places where things can go wrong. And then just very simple things can cause huge problems. I had a senior in to me about 2 months ago who was in danger of eviction, and she had all her, she said, I paid all my bills, and we looked at them, and she certainly had. And it turned out she gets SCREE from the city, which is the Senior Citizen Rent Increase exemption. And when it had come in, the secretary at the landlord's office had debited it rather than credited to her. So then suddenly she was getting late fees on top of it. So suddenly she went from, she actually
That's
owed
horrible.
nothing.
Yeah, that's horrible.
But she was 85 and she was terrified.
Of course.
And once we got it fixed, I mean, the landlord in this case actually called her and apologized. That's rare.
Greg, back to the affordability question. You're doing supply and demand here. Is one of the problems the supply, that there aren't enough, or are there enough and many of them are substandard? And if we could only fix those up, guess what? We have much less of a problem than we have as far as available and affordable housing.
Well, there's definitely a shortage in the sense that the vacancy rate in the city is very low. There's a lot of people who want to live here because there's actually jobs. However, you're talking about at what rent level are there apartments available? And so there's a huge demand for apartments with lower rents.
Well, yes.
Of course. I mean, that makes that's
Could have told you that.
Simple idea, right? Except that we are also factoring in that we're dealing in the Bronx with the spillover effects of gentrification in other parts of the city. So when you have rents going up much more dramatically in Upper Manhattan, in Washington Heights, in Harlem, East Harlem, right? You have a lot of those folks moving over to the Bronx because they're looking for a place that's still relatively affordable. Same thing happening in Brooklyn, where you've got rents going up a lot in Bushwick or Bed-Stuy, and people are being pushed out to the next neighborhood over. So they're going to Brownsville or East New York, right? So same idea where you're getting an influx of more low rent paying tenants, and they're competing for those same apartments. So it is like this game where who's willing to pay more of their income on rent, or who's willing to double up and have even more people in an apartment, because that's the competition there is for the apartments.
So supply is an issue. It's not only the conditions of buildings.
Right, and we've actually done a lot of work on building conditions. Not to say that it's all rosy and everything now, but we've been doing a lot of work over the last 4 or 5 years with the lenders, the banks who own the mortgages on the buildings, to identify the properties that they have mortgages on that are in distress, and have them put pressure on owners to make repairs in those buildings.
How successful, this is certainly an issue that we've dealt with just for years here on this program. How successful are those programs? My sense is we're doing a little bit better than we used to. You never used to hear where the city would take a property away from a rogue landlord, so to speak. But nowadays you hear it a little more often. Are we more successful than we used to be?
We are doing better now than we were a few years ago. Yes, obviously there's a lot of room to still improve, but we've got cooperation from the banks, a lot of banks, not all of them, but we've even got regulators working with us right now to put some pressure on the banks to have them do this as well. And so I would say things are getting better. However, the other piece of it is that a lot of the owners who have come in after the foreclosure crisis and bought up some of these really distressed and foreclosed buildings are doing repairs, but we think that a lot of that is surface level repairs. Just based on the amount of money they're still paying for the buildings, they're paying still pretty high prices. They can't afford to do a real significant renovation that the buildings probably need. So they're doing surface level. So what we're hoping is that this bill that was passed earlier this year in the City Council and is now going into effect is a bill that will allow the city to write violations for what they call underlying conditions. So not just surface things in the wall.
Replace the piping in the building.
Exactly. Like that's going to be actually the biggest target of it is plumbing and leaks inside the walls.
Critical issue.
Sally, let's talk about the housing court in the Bronx, which goodness, we've dealt with this for many years. Is the equation now at least somewhat a fair fight?
No.
Or it's not a fair fight?
No, it's not a fair
Aside
fight.
from the fact that it's dreadful to wait online and it doesn't come up.
90% of tenants will not be able to afford a lawyer. 90% of landlords will have a lawyer. And there's a lot of people who are taken advantage of. And if you go to housing court on any day and you just stand in the hallway and you'll just see people, the lawyers go up to people in the hallway. And I've seen tenants, I said, I've had tenants that I work with say, well, and they'll come in and I say, where did you sign this paper that says you have to pay all this money in 3 weeks when you know you can't do it? And they said, well, the guy told me I had to. And it turns out that was the landlord's lawyer who told them they had to. They didn't know any better. They sign it, and then they're stuck with it.
Is there an answer to this, an easy answer that we could do with the little time we have left?
Education. People don't know that they have rights.
Which really brings up one of the solutions. There were many solutions that came up in that report, Greg, that I was fascinated by. You believed that these supportive organizations are one of the answers, that we need to put more energy and create more of these kind of tenant groups and community advocacy groups. Yet I'm worried if you do that, that sends a signal to various powers that be. You know what? They go after them and they don't want, and then all of a sudden you've got a political battle that may be even larger than the one over just how to pay for your apartment.
Well, I will say that there's different ways to do organizing. There's more effective ways and such, and there's different partnerships and alliances that could be made. I was actually really inspired by something I saw recently, what they did in Los Angeles, where they were looking at a similar situation where tenants were struggling and were not, they were looking at wages and how are we going to have this discussion around having higher wages in our community. And they went out and spoke with small business owners. And they organized the small business owners about having, just asking them, what would it be like to have tenants or residents who live in your neighborhoods make more money so they could spend more money in your local businesses.
And the businesses were all for it.
They
right?
were.
Sure, why not?
And they actually got a living wage.
And so then all of a sudden the business owners say, you know what, so if I pay the people who work in my store a little more, then I'm contributing to this economy.
So like the larger uplift of everybody instead of kind of the race to the bottom and a real model of scarcity where there's not enough for anyone.
I'm going to ask you about something Sally said to me, and then I'm going to let her weigh in on it, and that is this idea of when we build new housing, and you could look at any project, not only in the Bronx, but throughout the city, that, the catchword is affordable housing. We're going to make 20% affordable. Is one of the simple answers to this, if you're going to build a new building, now let's make it 40% affordable or 50%, and all of a sudden you've increased, the available supply of affordable housing, or is it not as simple as that?
Well, the thing that the backstory of all of that is where is the money coming from to do those projects, right?
Well, you got my follow-up.
So that was going to be it. So I mean, we have limited resources, and right now, there is limited funding in terms of building new affordable housing. We could do. If there's more political will for it, we could do more. However, one of the biggest issues we're actually dealing on the political side is with sequestration is they're starting to cut back people's Section 8. So we're actually going in the direction where there's less subsidy money available, even for tenants who already have it, as opposed to going in the direction where we can even have this conversation about, like, could we build more? Should we build more?
So a property owner, even if you were to get him to say, sure, I'll make 50% affordable, but he can't afford to build the thing and then not take in, 50%.
If you're a landlord, I mean, this is why I think it's also in the interest of landlords to be interested in higher wages and perhaps more subsidy money, because you're talking about how are the tenants going to be able to pay their rent. So if you're looking to collect rent and you've been counting on your tenants getting Section 8 payments all these years, now all of a sudden Section 8 is not going to be able to pay the full amount, and the tenants are going to be responsible for more and more of it. This is going to eat into collections, and it's the same exact thing with. On the wage side, if they're not, if it's also expensive to deal with the whole eviction process and everything you have with lost rents and stuff. So if you had a situation where people were making enough money to afford the rent, you'd have less court cases as well.
And our friend Sally knows all too well about that. But you were the one who brought it up to me about this idea of increasing the percentage.
Well, not just increasing.
Is it a simple answer?
No, there's no simple answers. I got the audit. So I know.
I wish we had
Well, the thing
one.
is, and I think that's part of the problem, is that we've looked for simple answers, and so what we have is a series of patches that have put on top of each other, and they don't quite follow the problem. I really think that we have to start looking at this more holistically. You know, we have a system that isn't really a system. It's a series of things that people have tried over different times and then tweaked, and nothing quite fits together. But I also think that, you know, one of the things I see is that most of my clients can't afford affordable housing. And that's very real.
So talking about the living wage from $8.25 to $10 an hour
the thing
is nice,
that,
but it's not the answer.
Well, for instance, if and I don't have the figures, and you might know them better, but if you're going to be moving into one of the new buildings that's coming online, and you've got a family of 4, most often you have to make $35,000 or $36,000 and more. And that's reasonable, because otherwise you're not going to be able to afford the rent. I don't mean that people are gouging, but the problem is that there's a lot of people in the Bronx who don't come close.
And they're living in privately owned housing. And spending, you know, so the rents might be about the same, but they're spending, you know, that's what we're talking about, half their income on rent.
I see people who are paying 70% of their income.
You know, Greg, your study brought up something which I thought was fascinating, and it brings up a political thing. I don't want to make this partisan political dialogue, but subsidies creates a vicious cycle, doesn't it? In other words, the idea of subsidies, people say, well, goodness gracious, it would be great to have a voucher to assist me, whether it be Section 8 or whatever else, to assist me in paying the housing. But you're saying, you know, it's almost like welfare that keeps them poor and keeps them in a bad situation. Describe to me how that works. Okay, so,
I mean, basically, again, it ties back into wages, too, and thinking about, all right, so if we have jobs where, you know, since this Great Recession has, quote-unquote, ended, right, most of the jobs growth has been in low-wage work, part-time jobs, and these are the type of jobs where when you go in...
Construction work, blue-collar work.
Not even that, but retail. Or, I mean, other jobs where you go in and you're going to get a job at the store, and along with all the other paperwork you're filling out is an application for food stamps, because they know that your wages are not enough for you to make ends meet, and you're going to qualify for food stamps.
So they view that as part of the employment package.
Yeah. We subsidize low-wage work in this country. We make it possible for them.
And so how does that work in a cycle that really is harmful to the system?
Well, then we go in the direction where we're all arguing over who gets what benefits. Do we have enough benefits? And that becomes this political argument over who's deserving and who's not deserving, as opposed to saying, well, if you just have a job and you work a certain amount, are you entitled to make enough money to pay all your bills yourselves?
Well, this is what, and to make it political, is what Bill de Blasio, one of the things he said, he would create a new voucher system to help people leave shelters by subsidizing private rents. You would say, well, that's nice, but that is going to perpetuate a problem.
Well, it depends. I mean, if people are able to work, ideally that's what we want to have, is jobs that pay them enough money so they can pay the rent. And then what that would also do is free up more of the subsidy money for folks who are in most need of it, who aren't able to work either because they're disabled or they're seniors, or you know, mental health issues or what have you.
And I want to ask you a follow-up to that, to play the other political side. Joe Loda says, in fact, I think he was quoted very recently as saying that out-of-towners, people who come to New York, are bloating the homeless shelter system because they're saying, you know what, we're required to put you up if you're homeless in New York City, so come to New York City and they'll put you up. Is that accurate? And so he says, I'm just going to cut it off, and these out-of-towners won't be able to bleed our system.
And what's the cost, right? I mean, of doing that.
So it's not true.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any statistics on how many folks going into the shelter system, I mean, are from out of town. What we actually hear is that, you know, most of the folks coming into the shelter system are from very specific neighborhoods, like most of the Bronx, or, for instance, Brownsville in New York, in Brooklyn, because those are the neighborhoods with the lowest rent still. And so that, maybe they're not from there originally, but that's their last stop before they end up in the shelter system.
I really, in all fairness, I wanted to balance the political ideology here, so I had to do that.
But more often, what we see much more often are families who try to get into the shelter system and are turned away because they made the mistake after they were evicted of going to stay with a relative for a while. And that becomes untenable, and then they go to the shelter and they're told to go back to live with the relative, even if the relative doesn't want them.
I'm assuming you see that on a
We see it frequently, quite frequently, usually maybe 2 to 3 times a week.
You know, it's interesting because his study brought up something that I'm about to mention, and yet you've mentioned it on the show in 2 or 3 different ways, and that is that there are factors like health care and affordable health care, and Greg and his study, they talk a lot about wages, that really are impactful on this affordability problem.
We need to look at things much more holistically.
That's
we
what
don't
I
have a
was referring
holistic
to.
system. One of the things we do at West Bronx is when somebody comes in, we're going to look at the whole realm of what they need. Are there entitlements that they may qualify for that they don't know about? Are there situations that they're living with that we need to think about having that may have social implications? We have a social worker on staff constantly. So we want to look at everything.
Ever mindful that it's connected to all these.
Everybody, yes, everything is connected.
You know, Greg, I wanted to ask you about something. We were running out of time, but you had in the study about the Bronx Cooperative Development Initiative that you celebrated as something good. Very briefly, what is that?
So that's one of a number of different initiatives that are kind of in this model of what we might call new economy, where we're trying to create jobs that are more beneficial to Bronx residents. So whether that ownership structure is such that like worker-owned cooperatives, or even on top of that, tapping into where there is actually money and resources existing already in the Bronx. So as opposed to saying, you know, a typical idea of opening a business and you're looking at people who don't, you know, there's not, like I said, not much disposable income in the neighborhood.
Right.
Well, you know, there is a lot of money in institutions. So the hospitals and the universities, how do we get more of that money flowing back into Bronx businesses?
Again, ever mindful that there's an interconnectedness. Somebody just called right at the end of the show, and Jane, did I get his name? Is that Isham?
Yes, Isham.
Yes, Isham from the South Bronx, and he worked in the shelter system. You're going to have to be quick because we're running out of time.
Yeah, I worked in the shelter system for the past 6 years, and it's a fact that most of the participants do come from out of town and do cross the system and bog down the basic
Very interesting.
deliverable services that are available.
All right, Isham, thank you for that perspective. There you go. You live and you learn. Sally, let's put out the phone number and people who want some support.
718-798-0929.
Greg, before I ask for your phone number, somebody's looking for an apartment in the Bronx. Good luck, or is there something they can do?
I mean, there are groups that run affordable housing, and they're really inundated with applications. You know,
Keep the dialogue going, I think, would be. And there's the phone number for Greg's organization. That's 933-3101.
Just quickly on
15 seconds. Go ahead.
Okay. There's a 13-year waiting list for public housing in the city.
Yeah, we didn't even get to public housing.
And Section 8 has not taken an application in
all right. Sally
10 years.
Dunford, Greg Lobo, Jost, we hope to have you both back and to continue the dialogue because we have to have this dialogue.
Yeah.
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time.
Thanks for having us.
Folks, if you do have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, and you email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com or make a comment on our Facebook page. We'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Our archives are available at bronxnet.org. On the website, you click Bronx Talk. It's the bottom right-hand navigation bar. And, of course, please become a fan of Bronx Talk on Facebook. Now, next week, big show. The chairman of the Bronx County Democratic Committee, Assemblyman Carl Hastie, will be here to talk about a myriad of political and election issues. So make sure you're with us for that. Bronx Talk is, of course, Monday nights at 9 on BronxNet 67 and Fios 33. Thanks to Jane, our producer, Shirley, our director, Dina, who's our studio coordinator, and the cast of thousands who surround us each week behind the scenes. We'll see you next week. Yeah, don't get up. Don't get up. There we go.
I love being in classrooms like this one and learning new things. But I'm a Brooklyn girl, and I know school can be hard. It's demanding, and we kids have many distractions, lots of other things we could be doing.